I think a podcast is a great way to drive any kind of audience to whatever you're doing. If you have a business or you have something else that you want to kind of like elevate. I kind of did it backwards. I did the podcast first and then I did the book. And I wouldn't say, I don't feel like I have a business. These are just like projects that I've worked on and I'm putting that out there. If one day I had some kind of educational consultant business, then yes, that podcast and even the book could drive that. But I think what the podcast did first to then bring it to the book and then go back to the podcast is that my first episode, I do tell my story in a very small bite. So it's like 20 minutes, right? It's like, here's like the very like short version of my book. So if you wanted to like get an idea of my book, go listen to the first episode of season 1 on my podcast, The Teacher Story, and then you can get an idea. But it's also about the whole arc of every story with every guest that comes on my show is about their intimate story. So it matches. And then I just did the deep dive about the host. So like my podcast is about creating the space like you do for other people. And they share, why did you even get into education? What is your passion? What are the experiences that you had? The great moments, the hard moments, the challenging moments. Well, how did the pandemic maybe crack open something in you? Some left. I talked to transition teachers. Some are still in it. And now they're like part of like doing something innovative and cool or looking at it in a different way. And then like, what's that next step? What do we do from here? So that there's like a light of like the forward thinking. It doesn't just leave you of like, this is what happened. This is where I'm at. And my book ends like that with my journey that I've been on with like my spiritual journey, kind of this opening of education reform, shifting the system. And I have a curriculum at the end of my book about, you know, something we can do in all types of schools, state, private, micro, online, whatever. It could be a small program. It could be a huge program that I called Connected Consciousness. And it's really like children tapping into their inner strength so that they can then give something to the world. And it's done in 6 units and it's very like thematic. So it's very teachery, you know, so you can put it in an advisory program. You could put it in a psychology class. You could put it in like an elective, whatever, however you have a system, it could fit in something that meets once a week for a semester, however you want to do it. I have a lot of options. So the podcast goes that same way. So every guest that comes on, it's like a mini version of their own book. And then I wrote my book. And then my second book that I want to work on this summer is I want to bring now those voices back to the book. So sharing the narratives of guests and then also including now, I want to start interviewing students or just young people. And I have a couple young people who are now entrepreneurs in the educational space that will be coming on the podcast. I just like connected with this amazing young individual in Africa, and he has a whole system, like educational entrepreneurial system of how to like give more support to kids. I'm like, you need to come on my podcast. I want to hear about that. There's a lot of movement with like young people like that are still in like school aged. So like still the K through 12 school aged that actually want to be the leaders and start doing something now to transform it. And I'm like, yes, hell yeah, let's go. Yeah, lead me. I want to be on that path with you. So that's kind of the next layer is now bringing all of these voices that are in the space of we want to shift the system. We have all these ideas or we're doing it already, and then kind of compiling it like an anthology so that people can see like, okay, here's the story. Here's my story. Here are ideas. Boom. Now here's actually real people all over the world doing something about it, like evidence. Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I get to have an author on today. Of course, it's an author podcast, but the bonus is this guest today also has a podcast that supports authors and talks about the teachers as well. And that's what I love about this We get to chat all things, a little bit about podcasting, but as well about the book and all things happening as well. And we have a mutual friend, which makes it even better. So I even love that. So Jackie Scully's with me today here on the podcast. Jackie, it's a snow day. Welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Dave. Oh my gosh. Yeah, snow day in southern New Jersey means I got off from school because we had 2 to 3 inches. But it was freezing
Love it.
rain and it was in like the 20s, which is very cold for southern New Jersey. Mind you, I'm right near the Jersey Shore.
There you go. So, yes. So happy snow day to you and to all the teachers that are listening as well. Amazing. Talk a little bit about your podcast. Let's start there because that's always kind of fun to talk about. What's your podcast about and who's it for?
Thanks. My podcast is The Teacher Story, and it's not just for teachers. You hear that title and you think, oh, it's just for teachers. I do interview mostly teachers, but other people in education, even people outside of the field who are interested in diving into that industry because they want to shake it up and they want to shift the system, which I love. So the podcast started in the pandemic with a place to share voices from teachers who are really like going through a lot in the pandemic and I think needed a
Oh,
place to
yeah.
share their story. And now it's morphed into what can we do to really shift the system and make it innovative, true 21st century learning. Um, go rogue a little bit and break down like some of these walls that we've had up for a long time and these boxes that we've been putting ourselves in and kids in. So I do have some movers and shakers in like the entrepreneurial world, people who've worked for big companies that also are now like in their middle-aged time period of their life, as I am, that they're like, you know what? I have my eye on education because that's kind of a big foundation of society. And I want to see it grow into something that could be really a place where kids flourish because we want them to be our leaders in the world. So it's just been a great space now to innovate, create, and meet people from all over the world. I've had people from pretty much every continent besides Antarctica on the show,
Wow.
and
Nice.
still mostly United States, and still mostly teachers. But it's been nice to have them show me like what we can do in this type of,
Yeah.
industry. Because I've learned a lot. Like the podcast to me is not just like you. It's not about me. It's about my guests and it's about people that come on and they're teaching me something every single time I have a conversation. And now I'm in a place where I'm really interested in being in like the education reform space, alternate education. I might want to dip my toe into that as part of my career. So it's just fun. It's just fun to sit down with people who are like-minded and who
Right.
want to just talk to you and share their passion about whatever they're into. And so this is an education space, but we have conversations about all kinds of things too outside of that, about mental health, about, wellness, about sometimes even like spirituality, just world events. So you could have a title of a podcast, but it could be so much more depending on the guests that you bring on and like where it ebbs and flows. And so I know that you've kind
Mhm.
of experienced that in your, experience with multiple podcasts, but it like grows to be something. It's like you can have a plan, you can have a script, a program, but it really does grow because of the people you bring on.
How long have you been in the education space?
I've been in the education space for 19 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. What was the initial draw for you to get into that?
I would see my dad, and that feels so like a generic, like, hi, I'm gonna be Miss America kind of answer. No, but really, and I write about this in my book, which I know we're going to talk about, but my
Yes.
dad and myself, we would always have these long conversations in our drives I'm from Pennsylvania originally to Florida, and he would drive through the night, and I was the only one who would stay up as a kid and be like, well, I'm going to keep dad up and we're going to, just talk. And he's a history buff. He's like a cultural geography buff. So we would just talk about the world. We would talk about everything. My dad's a very curious mind. And that pulled me in, and I felt like he was my teacher. Like I had great teachers too, but I felt like my dad was my teacher. And when I decided, what am I going to do when I grow up, like in high school? Two routes, either journalism or education. And it's funny now that I'm in like the podcast and like author world, because I came to that in my 40s, but I really thought about journalism. But then I felt drawn to working with kids because my dad was also a social worker and worked with kids, and my mom was a nurse who worked with kids. I was camp counselor. I loved being like that person where kids were like, "Oh, I want to like come to you and talk to you," and you felt like you could be a mentor. And I really,
Mm.
most people do not understand this, but I really understand teenagers and just wanted to work with teenagers. So I work with high school age kids and people outside of this industry, or even in the industry, and they're in like elementary school or college. They're like, how do you do it? I'm like, I don't know. They're fascinating to me because they're going through such rapid development. I think it's really cool. And I know what it was like to be a teen, and it was hard. I did not like high
Yeah.
school. So maybe I could make it a little bit more silly and fun. That's just kind of what I want to do. Yeah. So I think my dad and just some of the life experiences I had.
I love it. Okay, let's talk about the book. We'll have links to the podcast in the show notes. I want everybody to go listen to that as well. But jump over to the book. Tell me, let's talk about the title of the book, but also what was the impetus for this book? How did this all come to be? Where did you get the idea for this?
So I originally came up with the idea to write a book before the podcast in 2022. And I was into reading and also listening to the podcast, Gabby Bernstein, and love her and was inspired by her. And I'm like, I can write a book. And then I don't know, I felt like I wasn't ready for that kind of level because I will tell everyone writing a book is much harder than making a podcast. So hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my life story, so it's very intimate. And I don't think I was at that point yet to fully tell that story and be committed to it. So I went the podcast route. I also wanted to really bring a space in for other people and myself to have these conversations, which then led me to coming back to the book. So the podcast actually was the catalyst for me coming back to this book idea. And I felt
Nice.
that I wanted to tell my story in a way of it's personal, but it's about teaching. And I want it to be really intimate, so that it's a place where people, whether they're in education or not, are like, I get it. Like, I get, not only what it's like to be a teacher, but a student. So I tell about my life as a student. Um, and to get kind of maybe at the heart of that lived experience so that maybe it will help this kind of momentum of what can we change in education. So like there was a mission of it being part of my activism, but it was part of my healing as well. So I felt like writing it and telling my story allowed me to bring that all out, to then fully get to the next level of if I want to be a leader in shifting the system in education, like I need to be that kind of raw and vulnerable to tell my story about what I've gone through as a student and a teacher. I've also taught in various places and public, private, charter, and international. So I've had quite a bit of different experiences and I've seen a lot of different ways to do it. And so I wanted to kind of include that as well. So the guided teacher, the title itself came to me in a way that I feel guided. Like, so part of it's kind of spiritual, but also by other
Yeah.
people. I give a lot of, I give my flowers to a lot of people in my book, to friends, to family, and higher power, whether you believe in that or not. That's something very close to me. Um,
Yeah.
about what has been part of my journey to get to this point. So it's not about when you hear like guided teacher, it's about like I'm always being guided by other people, other higher, kind of
Yeah.
powers. And it's not just like me being like, hey, these are all the things that I know. I have all these degrees.
Hmm.
I'm an expert. So I'm your teacher. I want to like break down that kind of barrier and say, we're always here to say, like, we can learn more. And I am where I'm at because of other people in my life and because of believing in the higher power that I believe in and all of that. But like, it's about not just you accomplishing something and you being this teacher who can like be a mentor, but I'm only here because of other people and other things that have come on my path. And so I wanted to kind of shift that in a way because I think there's a lot of like teachers writing books and education books where it's like how to do education,
Yeah.
how to be this. It's very expertise. That's great and it's needed. But I think sometimes there is a concern in education where it's a little too egocentric and it's about like, well, I know everything and I have these degrees or I have this experience, so I'm going to tell you everything. And mine's like,
Right.
no, I actually don't. And I've had a lot of people help me. And I'm going to continue that journey where I will always have other people and my faith and belief system help me.
Yeah. Okay. So, like when somebody buys a book for the first time from a new author they might not know of at this point, and they have the book in their hands, they go to the beginning, you just see the foreword, you see a little bit of an introductory to the book from your perspective, kind of leading us into what we're going to find. If you were able to verbalize a foreword for us as a new reader to this book, we have the guided teacher in our hands. What would you say to a new reader about to read chapter 1 for the first time? Any kind of message you'd have for the reader that's going to purchase this book and read it?
I would say that you're going to open up a diary. So I've had some people give me that feedback, and that's actually kind of how I wanted to write it and how I just did it. Like I would sit with music from the time period. So there's music references. So if you
Oh,
are
yes.
I would say if you're Gen X, Zennial, or early millennial, and everyone's like, what's Zennial? It's like this micro generation that I am part of. It sits like 7 years. I don't know. It was like 1976 or something to 1983. I don't know. Somewhere around there. I'm 1982. But if you're somewhere around that sweet spot, oh, you're going to get a lot of references. So I sat with a lot of just sitting and listening to music, and it would bring back these memories. And then I almost wrote like I was in that time period. So it's going to feel like a diary entry. It's going to feel like you're sitting down with someone that you don't know, but maybe now you feel like I've had neighbors read my book recently and they've come up to me. They're like, I feel like I know you really intimately. And it's like, it's cool, but it's kind of strange because like, we're friendly neighbors that say hi and bye, walk the dogs, do whatever, maybe like have gone to a couple of like neighborhood events post COVID because we weren't going to anything during COVID. And now they're like, now I strangely know a lot about you intimately. And like, I really like, I want to have these conversations with you. So it's kind of funny
Nice.
that, without knowing me at all, I guess I wrote it in a way where you're going to sit down and be like, oh, this is almost like a friend. And whether you're a teacher or not, or even care about education or not, I talk a lot about other things in life. Like I lived through, um, I talk about Y2K, 1999 to 2000,
Remember?
and we thought like the
Yeah.
world was going to shut down.
Dun, dun,
And I
dun.
graduated from high
Right.
school in 2000, and we were like the millennial year, like all through school. And then 9/11 in college, and
Yeah.
the Great Recession while I was a teacher and moving around trying to get a job. And then the pandemic. So, I mean, there's a lot of things on a historical, cultural, global level that I think could also touch people where it's not like, oh, I'm going to read this and I have no desire to learn about education or a teacher's life, but there's more about the time periods that I've lived through. Um, and I think what could resonate a lot with readers is also the earlier chapters are about me being a child and the light that I felt, I was a very like bubbly, person who just wanted to play with kids in my neighborhood and like create adventures. I was just like, everything was a possibility. And then I went into the school system and immediately felt like, oh, I have this label. You need reading guidance, or you're deficient in this. We're going to put you in this program. You're not popular, or you don't have these types of athletic skills. Like immediately, like elementary school. I was already getting
Yeah.
phone calls home in first grade. Have you? Saying I talk too much and now I have a podcast, so that's funny.
That makes sense.
But already feeling the structure caving in and
Yeah.
putting you in a box of deficiency, not brilliance, not expansion, but deficiency. And maybe other people had an experience of like, I was gifted or I was in this and that. But even in that, I had a neighbor who was in the gifted program in elementary school, and it totally was a horrible experience for him. He felt isolated. He did not want to be in it, but his parents pushed him into it. And so there's a lot of things where it doesn't matter if you're in gifted or if you're getting learning support, you're in boxes. And so I think the early chapters speak about what it's like to just be a child and play and then be put into a system and immediately be like jolted around and getting these identifiers and these like things that are labels that they're all human made, and they kind of stay with you for a good chunk of your life. Because again, I had a reading specialist when I was in school, like in elementary school, and then I was in like remedial English classes, and then I worked my way up to honors English. Here I am today. I just wrote a book and I have a podcast and I teach AP classes. Like that's great now, but like for a long time, my whole track was I felt I'm not smart enough in this area. I can't do that. And that's what got me actually off the track of journalism when I thought about doing that for college. Yeah.
Really?
And I didn't have like a support system within like the school. It was in a really big public school. So there's the part, it's very balanced. It's not all very dark like I'm talking about. I talk about light
Yeah.
and shadow, but I think there's a lot of areas where it can resonate with people that grew up in the 80s and 90s, 2000s even, where you still feel like the system's really putting you into this box and holding you back. But now we're kind of at an age where we're waking up to it, maybe more so than, say, the baby boomers and earlier generations, where it's just that's what it was, that's what you did. But we're kind of this
Yeah.
like, I always feel like the people in their 40s now straddle between we had the old school stuff growing up, but then we were emerging into the millennial time period.
Mhm.
So we are kind of like recognizing what we experienced as young children and teenagers. And we're like, I don't really feel good about that. Where when you talk to like older people, like my parents and so forth, they're like, we all did it, get over it. That's how it is. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just like, it's a
Right.
different vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, teachers today are the unsung heroes of all things going on because of all the things that teachers have to work through, to work under these things. I can remember picturing like a cartoon where parents are bringing their child to Beat the Teacher night, and it's all about, well, your child is disruptive or not focused, and the parents supporting the teacher. Now it's like the opposite, where it's like your child is this or that, and the parents are like, well, that's your fault
Right.
as a teacher, and I'm like, wait a minute, what happened there? We need that support. The other thing, I have a teacher friend who shared this story with me, that there was a teacher was teaching a class about science in like grade school. And one of the students, the little girl, was looking out the window and saw a bee flying around outside the window, and she was fascinated by the bee. So she wanted to ask the teacher a question about how does a bee fly? Because she was like just fascinated by this thing. And so the teacher's response was, we're not talking about bees today in class. We're talking about volcanoes. So pay attention. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Where do we go from asking great questions to answering
Yeah.
great questions? Like, where is that? What do you see as a teacher where children are fascinated by one thing, but then redirected to the box that we need to work within as a teacher?
Yeah.
Where do you kind of find that balance between a child's built-in curiosity and then following a curriculum? Do you have any kind of thoughts around that?
That's a great point, because especially with teaching psychology, and I teach seniors, so they're like 17, 18 years old, they still ask questions like that usually about what we're doing in psychology or something that's kind of within the curriculum, but maybe not within the lesson that day. And I get thrown off all the time, and I'm like, that's a great question. I haven't even thought of that. I don't even know about that. I think the first thing is, because we're all tied to time, schedules, testing, but is to acknowledge the question. And so when a student has raised something that doesn't have anything to do with the lesson, but it like popped in their head, it's to acknowledge it and say, oh, that's a really interesting question. I've never thought about that. Or if you have thought about that, like I have, but I don't know the answer or don't know fully the research behind that. But now I'm curious. And I've often found, like, if you take a little bit of time later, it doesn't have to happen in real time, after class, like say that stays with me, and I like look up an article, look up something about that topic, and then I send it to the student and say, it's not like I have the answer, but like I went and I researched something because it was intriguing. And I send them like, this reminds me of the conversation or the question you brought up in class today. It doesn't even have to go anywhere else. I'm not here having to present myself as an expert. I'm just presenting myself as, I'm curious like you, and you piqued my interest. That's something I think that is cool, and I want to like explore. And then I'm going to show you a resource, and they almost 90% of the time, they're going to go read that article, or they're going to go down a rabbit hole, and they're going to come back to you and share something even deeper. And it's really, really cool. And that's real learning. And that's when the teacher and the student are not teacher student, like teacher up above. It's like together as a partnership, and you are learning together from each other. And I think that's like the magic right there. So you don't have to like say, now I'm going to take my lesson about the volcano and make it about bees, because you might have like a thing you got to get done. Maybe there's testing on that, whatever. But you can acknowledge it, and you can kind of like table it and say, I'm going to put a pin in that over here. And I always have Post-it notes. Like if you looked at my desk at school, I looked like I have chaotic organization. That's like what it is. Like I know what's going on, but if someone came into my desk, they'd be like, you're like a mad scientist. What's going on? But I have Post-it notes like all over my desk. So like as soon as someone raises some kind of question or something that I might want to check out, I write it down, and I just like plop it on my desk, because I'm a visual person. I can't just write it in like a notebook or something else. It has to be like on my desk so that I could see it like the next day or whenever I can get to it. But that takes like a second, I mean, an exchange for maybe a minute with that child will mean so much to them. And even if you just go and find something that could take, again, 5-10 minutes out of your day and find an article, it doesn't even have to answer the question, but you're just like, I'm in this research process with you. That's what kids are actually looking for when they say stuff like that. They are. They're like, I'm curious about this, and you're my teacher. And I think like you would be curious about this. And when you dismiss it and you're like, no, that's not important, we got to move on, it actually really stays with that child. And if you just take a minute to acknowledge it and do a little bit of research and send them something, or even just bring it up the next day, that actually really stays with them for a long time. It's amazing what children hold on to. They hold on to the super negative and the super positive, and they could be very minute, small interchanges.
Right. Yeah. And I think from my perspective too is A teacher that's constantly learning and curious is probably, to me, as a student, probably more interesting because they're on a journey to learn and grow instead of just achieving a degree, which is great, and then that's it to their learning. They do the mandated courses to upgrade their learning, but they kind of like, I've made it to this level, so everyone listen to me because I have reached this plateau, and now I will teach. I like when a teacher's like, I have no idea about that. I'm going to go figure it out and let's have a conversation. I love your idea. Great question. Right? That makes me go, oh, this is a human up there in front of me in class, not some robot that's kind of reading to me a script.
That's not AI, right?
That's right.
That's
it's not
the
AI.
difference
Exactly.
right there. AI doesn't do that. They're just going to go find you an answer that they did some Google algorithm. That's AI. And at one point, maybe AI will be more human. That's what we're all like, what's going to happen in the future? But for at least right now, if you don't want to be AI and you want to be like, teachers are still important, we don't have to do this like all by robots, like be invested in the humanity of curiosity. I think that's really a big thing, Nice.
Yeah. It's good advice. So is that something you would say to students that are learning to be teachers right now? They're studying to be the next generation of teachers. Is there anything else you'd impart wisdom-wise to that class?
Yeah, I would say if you're not in this field because you genuinely care about kids, but you also just genuinely care about learning and being curious and asking questions. If you're in it because you want to be an expert in something and impart knowledge that you just know and fill heads, it's not going to work. It won't last very long. That's very old school. And again, with the access to AI, internet, everything, kids know how to become experts in things, or at least practice on being an expert, YouTube videos, whatever you want to do. Most of the things we do around the house is watching YouTube videos, for the most part. So you need to be able to show that you are human and that you do really care about asking those questions. And the biggest part of the job really is facilitating. It's creating the space, creating the structure of the space to allow for good questions, good discussion. You're creating a safe space where you're building a classroom culture where kids feel okay to ask questions. They feel okay to get to know each other. It's not just like about you and the students and that's it, but it's like the whole environment of everyone. Everyone's bringing something to the table. So I always ask this question at the end of the school year, and I say, this is the most important question, not the other questions I led up to this question. So I asked, like, what was the most important themes of the 20th century, like in my world history class? What was the biggest cause effect, takeaways, whatever. And then I said, this is the biggest question. This is where I really want you to reflect on it. What did you learn from each other? And I want you to get granular. I want you to think specifically about each person in this classroom. I'm fortunate I have kind of smaller classes in an independent school, so kids don't have to think about 30 other kids in the room, maybe only 10 or 12. But still, I think, like, really think about it. And I've had students come up and they're like, I remember when blah, blah, blah's name presented about this country, and he did this really cool thing that was interactive, and it made me really engage, and it made me want to learn more about that country. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like, and it was the student who did that. It wasn't me,
Yeah.
That's cool.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I remember sitting in on all those parent-teacher nights where the school was open, our kids could walk us around, show us the artwork on the wall when they were little, and we got to go sit in with the teacher. We had our little mandated moments where we could sit down and have one-on-one with the teacher about our child in school. And so when their kids were small, we had to sit on the really tiny chairs in the classroom with the teacher. But we'd have a chance to talk to the teacher and kind of get their insight to help us as parents to be more supportive of our teachers in school. Well, let's imagine that we can go there in this moment for the parents that are listening to this, and they're listening about teachers and all of this. If you have an opportunity to sit down with parents today and talk about that bond between teacher and parent, how important is it, and what can we do as parents to strengthen the bond that we have with the teachers for our kids? Any suggestions?
I think it's a really important bond. I want to see it strengthened because I think it was, at least in America, it was weakened over the pandemic. In some cases, in some areas, a lot of the debates about curriculum and like how we were doing school. It was also just a very like emotional time. Everything was just stressful. And so people were just in their emotions. But parent and a teacher together is the ultimate like support team for a child. And ultimately, those
Right.
two want the best for that student, that child. And so I think communication is key. I think teachers like myself as a school, we could do more with communication. I know in my school, more so in the lower and middle school, because we're a three division school, they do like newsletters that go out weekly. Um, Not just from the division, but from like teachers and say, like, this is what we did in class this week. That might, you could do a scheduled email and it might take you 5 minutes to write up, like, here's the cool things we did in class this week. This is what your students are working on. And you schedule it out to go out Friday after school. And it could be a short blip. And I've heard that goes, I have not done that yet. And so something I'd like to try to do more is that communication. I think it opens the door for parents to then want to come and email you or just want to meet with you and say like, let's have like more communication. I think there's a lack of communication. I think there's been a boundary or a border between school and home for a really long time. And then I think the pandemic kind of merged those two things. And then it became a little volatile in some areas of our country with like, again, curriculum. But I think it also allowed for there's a lot of spaces in the alternative education space that are becoming like micro schools, online schools, where parents are super involved. I think they should be. And I think it should be a healthy relationship where the parents want to work with the teachers want to work with the parents. I think that the parents should know what is in the curriculum and why it's in there. Why are we doing what we're doing?
Yeah.
What are your
Yeah.
what's your feedback? What's your suggestions? Because ultimately you're serving a community. Like I'm in a private school, so it's kind of like a business model, if you will. Like they are customers, they're paying for it. But even in public
Mm.
school, you're serving a certain community. Every community is different that you teach. I've taught in Hawaii. That was a very different community than other places that I've taught. So you have to, as a teacher, as a school, the administration, you have to know your community. You have to be in the community and you are serving them still. Like you are there to do a service because they every community needs has different needs, right? Um, there might need to be more like workshops that are available for parents to learn some things about how they can help their kids. It depends on what's going on and where you live. But I think that there needs to be more of a bridge between the two. And it's not just on the teachers, that's the school itself. So administration, superintendent, head of school, whatever kind of school system you're in, needs to make that as part of the schedule or structure and not just back to school night. Back to school night,
Yeah.
one night at the
Yes.
beginning of the year, parent conference, like one or two times. That doesn't really cut it. And a teacher can send those emails, can send those newsletters, but it can't also just be up to each individual teacher to say, well, you have to formulate the structure to have these relationships. Well, no, that's the whole school community has to do that. And we're all on
Mm.
board together. And I think the more we can look at all members of the community as a team and not the teachers or administration superintendent telling the parents this is how it is or telling the kids this is how it is, but bringing everyone on board and having more maybe like forums, workshops, where there's a lot of voice and maybe like
Yeah.
surveys that are taken, but get feedback and work with the families and say transparently, depending again, the school system you're in, these are our state standards. We have testing. Again, if it's a state
Yeah.
school, these are the things that we have to do legally, but here are the areas where we might have more space for you to be involved, for you to give that feedback. And I think, oh my goodness, that would go so far. I know parents are craving that too.
Hmm. Yeah. 100%. We'll talk about the the bond between the book and the podcast. Because when I have authors come on this show, I mention to them, wow, your book idea and what you've written would be great if you had a podcast around the topic, because you could sell the book and promote your book on your show. But the topic is so amazing. I think that many people would love to hear this in an audio format and hear you talk about what you're an expert in. And when I do that, sometimes the authors look at me like I've just explained the light bulb for the first time, because they're like, what? What? You want me to be a podcaster? What? So you're doing it. You have the podcast, you have the book. Talk about the marriage of the two and how each helps each other. For maybe an author listening that hasn't really contemplated having a podcast in addition to their book, what's the benefits for you as a podcaster and as an author to kind of blend those together?
I think a podcast is a great way to drive any kind of audience to whatever you're doing. If you have a business or you have something else that you want to kind of like elevate. I kind of did it backwards. I did the podcast first and then I did the book. And I wouldn't say, I don't feel like I have a business. These are just like projects that I've worked on and I'm putting that out there. If one day I had some kind of educational consultant business, then yes, that podcast and even the book could drive that. But I think what the podcast did first to then bring it to the book and then go back to the podcast is that my first episode, I do tell my story in a very small bite. So it's like 20 minutes, right? It's like, here's like the very like short version of my book. So if you wanted to like get an idea of my book, go listen to the first episode of season 1 on my podcast, The Teacher Story, and then you can get an idea. But it's also about the whole arc of every story with every guest that comes on my show is about their intimate story. So it matches. And then I just did the deep dive about the host. So like my podcast is about creating the space like you do for other people. And they share, why did you even get into education? What is your passion? What are the experiences that you had? The great moments, the hard moments, the challenging moments. Well, how did the pandemic maybe crack open something in you? Some left. I talked to transition teachers. Some are still in it. And now they're like part of like doing something innovative and cool or looking at it in a different way. And then like, what's that next step? What do we do from here? So that there's like a light of like the forward thinking. It doesn't just leave you of like, this is what happened. This is where I'm at. And my book ends like that with my journey that I've been on with like my spiritual journey, kind of this opening of education reform, shifting the system. And I have a curriculum at the end of my book about, something we can do in all types of schools, state, private, micro, online, whatever. It could be a small program. It could be a huge program that I called Connect to Consciousness. And it's really like children tapping into their inner strength so that they can then give something to the world. And it's done in 6 units and it's very like thematic. So it's very teachery, so you can put it in an advisory program. You could put it in a psychology class. You could put it in like an elective, whatever, however you have a system, it could fit in something that meets once a week or a semester, however you want to do it. I have a lot of options. So the podcast goes that same way. So every guest that comes on, it's like a mini version of their own book. And then I wrote my book. And then my second book that I want to work on this summer is I want to bring now those voices back to the book. So sharing the narratives of guests and then also including now I want to start interviewing students or just young people. And I have a couple young people who are now entrepreneurs in the educational space that will be coming on the podcast. I just like connected with this amazing young individual in Africa, and he has a whole system, like educational entrepreneurial system of how to like give more support to kids. I'm like, you need to come on my podcast. I want to hear about that. There's a lot of movement with like young people like that are still in like school aged. So like still the K through 12 school aged that actually want to be the leaders and start doing something now to transform it. And I'm like, Yes. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. Come on.
Yeah. Lead me. I want to be on that path with you. So
See.
that's kind of the next layer is now bringing all of these voices that are in the space of we want to shift the system. We have all these ideas, or we're doing it already, and then kind of compiling it like an anthology, so that people can see, like, okay, here's the story, here's my story, here are ideas. Boom. Now here's actually real people all over the world doing something about it, like evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. So as we're chatting through today, I'm on your website following along, and the website's beautiful, by the way. Send everybody there and tell us how to connect with you and everything, Jackie. And then I have one more question to kind of follow up here on the end, but talk us through the website. Tell us what we're going to find when we go there.
Yeah. So I have my website's JackieCScully.com. I have the C as my middle initial because there's apparently many Jackie Scullys in the world. So you can find me there. And there's a lot of information about the podcast, the book, and just I have a link to like my LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn and also like Instagram, Facebook. I'm Jackie C. Scully, so you'll always put the C there, the middle initial.
Yeah.
So yes, you can always send me a message or email if you want to sign up on my website. I'd be happy to chat and connect.
I love it. Okay, so the book is The Guided Teacher. So my question is around the title of your book. I'm interested to find out, as an ongoing teacher who's growing and learning, right? I get that from you, that you're always on this quest for what's next for you and for all the great things happening in your life as a teacher. I want to know who's guiding you right now. Who is somebody that you're looking to, that you're learning from, that's speaking into your life as a teacher, to give them a little shout out and some credit for their work and how it inspires you. Who are you looking up to right now? Who's got your
Oh,
attention?
there's so many. So I want to just give a shout out to my good friend who's also a teacher, she's an art teacher. Her name's Jess Meanenford. And she was on my podcast, but she was the one who inspired this joint podcast that we're doing that we're going to kick off in February called The Intuitive Teacher. I think she's inspiring me right now because she's still a dedicated teacher, does it every day in person. And she teaches elementary. When you're an elementary art school teacher, you're like going through like K through 6, and she has to teach
Wow.
at like 3 different schools. So she's traveling around, long commutes. And she's doing her side practice of being like this transformational wellness coach and tapping into, like, again, that intuitive abilities of like getting to do that inner work. And a lot of, people in education, but even outside of education, who really are like wanting to work on their transformation. And she's just so into everything. And then she's like, let's do a podcast. And she brought this spirit and energy and creativity back out of me again. I mean, obviously, like, I've been working on stuff, but then you go through like lulls, you go through time periods.
Yeah.
I had quite a stressful, as many teachers do, a fall and into the holidays. And she brought this back into my life, and just really impressed with her and impressed with
Nice.
the dedication and like the drive and creativity. And so it's fun to work alongside other educators who are also doing so many of their side projects, but it's all about like helping to elevate people. Like, it's just, it's a service. It's beautiful.
Nice. I love that. I love that. It's always nice to find who inspires you, because you're inspiring us through the book, through the podcast. You're putting out great stuff into the world. So it's always nice to kind of know who fills your cup, because that speaks highly of that person
Yeah,
as well.
thank
So,
you.
Jackie, it's so great to have you on the podcast, and it's great to follow your story. I'm glad that we have a mutual friend now as well that brings us together, and
Yes.
so good to have you on the
Thank you,
podcast. Thank you for
Vicky.
making time to do this. Yes, Vicky, we
We
love
love
you.
you.
Thank you for making time to do this, Jackie, on a very snowy, cold day,
Yes.
right?
Nowhere
Yes.
near what it's
And,
probably like in
yeah.
Canada.
Well, yeah, it's all relative, but yes, it's so great to have you on the podcast.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for doing
Thank
this.
you so much.
All right, everybody, all the information's in the show notes for Jackie. Go over, listen to her podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, share. Share it with your teachers in your life and your friends and family that are teachers as well, so they can fall in love with a great podcast. Buy the book, The Guided Teacher. It's all on the website. Jackie's information will be in the show notes. Go ahead, click through, follow her on LinkedIn as well. Connect with a great teacher and a great leader. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Dave. This has been a pleasure. I love it.
Hey, well, thank you for listening. It's a new year, and we're excited to be releasing even more great episodes of Living the Next Chapter, and we want you to come along for the journey. Thank you for being here. If you know of an author that you would love to have featured on the podcast, an author that you enjoy, an author that brings you that excitement, that you would just love to hear them interviewed on this podcast, I would love to hear your suggestion for a future guest, and what would be a question or two that you would want us to ask them on your behalf. Go to livinginthenextchapter.com. There's a little speak pipe icon there. You can leave me a voice message. Tell me who should be on the show and give me some question ideas. And I'll use your request and reach out to that author and invite them on and give you full credit for the idea. livinginthenextchapter.com. Would love to hear your suggestion, and thank you for listening. Catch you on the next episode.
Hey there, fellow parent. If you're anything like me, balancing screen time for our kids is a constant struggle. That's why I want to share a little secret with you, KidsPod. It's this amazing app I found that's packed with podcasts just for kids. Imagine stories, learning, and fun, all without the screen. It's been a game changer in our house, keeping my kids engaged and their imaginations running wild. And guess what? It's completely free. So download KidsPod today. Trust me, it's a decision you won't regret.